The morning felt just like every other. A soft mist rolled off the lake, the air still and cool, and Red, my old hound, trotted beside me down the gravel path like always. That path led to the place I treasured most in the world, the lake cabin my grandfather built by hand. It sat quiet, tucked into a stand of pine trees that rustled even when there was no wind, like they were always whispering family secrets. Coffee in one hand, leash in the other, I was already thinking about whether I'd fish or fix that loose board on the dock when I rounded the bend. Then I stopped dead in my tracks. A tall, shiny silver fence now ran straight across the trail, thick bars bolted into concrete. On it were 3 bright red signs that screamed, "Private property, no trespassing, HOA access only." At first, I thought maybe I was seeing things. I blinked. Took a step forward. Red growled. It was real. The fence stretched the full width of the trail and partway into the woods. Welded. Permanent. It cut off the only land access to my family's cabin. I stood there for a minute, trying to make sense of it. Was this a prank? A mistake? Then I spotted a white envelope taped to one of the bars. I pulled it off, opened it, and read the first line. Notice of violation. Your lake cabin is in breach of community shoreline usage regulations. No signature. No contact info. Just an HOA logo and vague legal jargon about non-compliance and pending review. It was like they pulled text from a fake lawyer website and slapped it on a letterhead. I laughed under my breath. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. That cabin has been in my family for over 70 years. My grandfather built it before the HOA even existed. Long before the gated community popped up on the south side of the lake. That land was ours. And not just by tradition, we had the papers to prove it. I climbed over the fence, careful not to spill my coffee, and walked down the path like I always did. Everything looked untouched. The cabin was fine. The dock still bobbed in the morning ripples. But the feeling was gone. That easy, peaceful rhythm I always found here had been shattered. I sat on the porch, pulled out my phone, and called the HOA number from the last notice they'd mailed me months ago when they tried to fine me for unpermitted shoreline fixtures, whatever that meant. Voicemail. Typical. So I drove down to their office, which was really just a room in the clubhouse on the other side of the lake. The front desk kid looked about 20 and chewed gum like he was timing it. "Can I help you?" he said, barely looking up. "Yeah," I said, dropping the envelope on the counter. "Who fenced off my land?" He blinked at the paper. Karen said it was part of the new shoreline beautification policy. Karen, I repeated. Karen was the HOA president, queen of passive-aggressive notices, known for her HOA newsletters that read more like declarations of war. She once fined a neighbor for a disruptive wind chime. I wish I was joking. "I want it removed," I told him. "You can submit a compliance request form," he said. "But fencing's already approved by the board." Karen said it was necessary. I stared at him for a few long seconds. "Tell Karen she's fenced off the wrong man's land." He shrugged. "You can fill out the form." I didn't fill out the form. I left, drove back home, pulled out the original land deeds from the fireproof safe, the surveyor maps, the cabin permit, signed in 1962. Every document was crystal clear. That land was mine. Always had been. But it didn't matter to them. This wasn't about rules. It wasn't about shoreline policy. This was about control. And if they wanted a war over who owned that stretch of lakefront, well, they were about to learn that I'd been here long before the HOA was even a thought. And I knew exactly where to strike back. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that fence. Shiny, smug, and completely out of place on the trail I'd walked since I was a kid. The more I thought about it, the more it hit me. This wasn't just some HOA mistake. This was personal. Karen knew exactly what she was doing. The next morning, I pulled out the documents again, spread them across my kitchen table like a war map. My family had owned that stretch of land for over 70 years. The original deed dated back to 1953, signed in fountain pen. Back then, the lake wasn't even on a map. There were no subdivisions, no fancy HOA regulations, Just wilderness and a few folks like my grandfather carving out something real. Then the developers came. The south side of the lake turned into a gated community with matching mailboxes, boat docks with white rope rails, and an HOA that looked more like a mini-government than a neighborhood group. But even as the lake got busier, our side stayed quiet. The HOA was never supposed to touch our land. In fact, the original bylaws from their own documentation stated that non-subdivision lots beyond the southern zone are not subject to association jurisdiction. It was in black and white. I had the receipts. And still, they had the nerve to drive steel posts into my dirt. I made copies of every document and brought them to the county office. The clerk there, a woman named Judy, had known me since high school. She looked at the fence photos, then the documents, and shook her head slowly. "They're way out of line," she said. "But if you want to do this right, we'll need to file a formal property dispute." I asked how long that would take. 3 months, maybe more. 3 months. That's how long I'd have to stare at a fence on my land. That's how long Karen would keep grinning in those board meetings, probably bragging about how she was cleaning up the shoreline. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about the cabin. It was about the dock. You see, the HO didn't care about my land until they started drawing up those fancy new marina plans a couple years back. They had big dreams, expanding lake access, more amenities, private docks, and a members-only boathouse. Problem was, the only stretch of open, legally buildable shoreline was mud. They tried to buy it 2 summers ago. Sent me a letter offering a generous community payout to hand over the edge of my land. I laughed and tossed it in the trash. That must have ticked them off. Because a year later, the fencing started. First a little stake with flagging tape, then a property review notice stuck to my mailbox, and now, full-blown barriers and bogus legal letters. But here's what Karen forgot. That giant HO dock the entire neighborhood uses, the one with the pretty benches, the built-in ladder, and the kayak rack? I built it. 15 years ago, the HOA was nothing but an idea with no funds. They came to me because I had the equipment, the experience, and the lakeside property. I agreed to help, but we wrote up a contract. I'd fund and build the dock, and they'd lease it $4/$1 a year. The ownership never changed hands. I'd almost forgotten about that contract until I pulled it from a filing cabinet marked Miscellaneous Projects. There it was, signed and stamped. Dock ownership remains with builder. Lease may be revoked at any time, with 48 hours notice. That changed everything. Because while they were busy fencing off my cabin, they'd completely forgotten who gave them their access to the lake in the first place. They wanted to block me from the shoreline? Fine. But they were about to learn what a lake looks like when the only dock disappears overnight. I couldn't believe what she did next. And if you're hooked like I was, hit that subscribe button now. This story's just getting started. The next few days were strangely quiet. Karen didn't show up. No new signs, no fresh threats taped to my gate. Just silence. But it wasn't the good kind. It was the kind of silence that creeps in before a storm. I could feel it every time I walked past that fence. Like the ground itself knew something was off. I didn't waste time. I took that old lease agreement, the one they all forgot about, and made 5 fresh copies. 1 for my lawyer. 1 for the sheriff's office. 1 for the county property board. 1 for the HOA's own legal inbox. And the last one? I kept that for me, folded neatly in my jacket pocket every time I walked by their dock. It was almost funny watching them host events on something they didn't own. Karen would strut down the walkway in her blazer and sun hat, greeting guests like she was the queen of the lake. Families snapped photos. Kids dangled fishing poles off the edge. All of it resting on a dock that legally belonged to the man she was trying to fence out. I knew what I had to do. Now, this wasn't going to be a chainsaw at midnight kind of revenge. I wasn't about to cause chaos or scare families. This had to be clean, quiet, precise. So I made a call to my cousin Nate. He runs a small local construction outfit, mostly houseboats and dock repairs, but the guy knows his way around a barge. We'd worked together back when I first built the HOA dock. He still had the original plans saved on his old laptop. He picked up on the first ring. "You still got that barge with the winch system?" I asked. He laughed. "But You taking back the dock? I didn't answer right away. Just said, midnight, Friday. Bring rope, lights, and a thermos. That week dragged on like molasses. Karen must have thought she won. The HOA sent out an email about enhanced shoreline protection and a necessary fencing adjustment on the north edge of the lake. They even attached a photo of my fence like it was a trophy. I didn't reply. I waited. Friday night came. Cold, no wind, moon high but quiet behind thin clouds. Perfect conditions. Nate met me at the launch ramp just down the shoreline. We wore black hoodies, work gloves, and headlamps set to red so we wouldn't attract attention. The lake was still, except for the soft knock of water against the hull. The dock was about 60 feet long. Modular sections bolted together and anchored with cables. We didn't have to break anything, just unbolt, detach, and float. It was like working in reverse. Every wrench turn felt like justice. Quiet, measured justice. Piece by piece, we disconnected the entire thing. By 2:30 a.m., the dock was loaded onto the barge, tied down, and ready to go. We didn't leave trash. Didn't damage anything. Just erased it. Nate steered the barge toward my private inlet, on my land far from the HOA's reach, and tucked it behind the trees where no one could see a thing. I tossed a tarp over the whole structure and let the fog roll back in. By sunrise, the only thing left where the dock used to be were a few empty pilings and a floating sign I left behind. Lease terminated, owner, not you. By noon, my phone blew up. For missed calls from the HOA's main number. 2 emails with the subject line, urgent. 1 message from Karen herself that simply said, "You made a huge mistake." But I hadn't. I had made a legal move. I sat on the porch of my cabin, sipping coffee, listening to the birds chirp like nothing had happened. Red laid by my feet, tail wagging in his sleep. It was peaceful again. Almost like the lake was saying thank you. They took my fence for granted. They assumed silence meant weakness. But now the lake had 1 less dock. And Karen had 1 less place to stand. The HOA meeting was set for Saturday morning. Karen called it mandatory, in bold red letters across the email, like anyone cared. The subject line said, emergency dock situation. I nearly laughed. Emergency? It wasn't an emergency when they fenced off my family cabin. It wasn't urgent when they decided I didn't matter. But now that their precious dock was gone, now it was all hands on deck. I didn't plan on going. I figured I'd let them sweat. But around 8 a.m., I heard gravel crunching out front. Red perked up, growled low. I stepped onto the porch and saw Jim, from the HOA board, standing awkwardly by the gate, holding a to-go coffee and a folder. Jim was one of the quieter ones, always looking uncomfortable at Karen's meetings like he didn't want to be there but couldn't find a way out. He lifted the coffee like a peace offering. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "Can we talk?" I nodded slowly. "You here as a neighbor, or as a board member?" He hesitated. "Both, I guess." We sat at the picnic table. He slid the folder over. Inside was a stack of papers, photos of the dock, old HOA minutes, and a highlighted clause from the original lease I'd written years ago. The clause that proved I owned it. He'd clearly done his homework. "We didn't know," he said. "Karen told us it was donated." "She lied," I said flatly. "I believe you." That part caught me off guard. He looked genuinely frustrated. "Look, I didn't even vote for the fencing. Half the board didn't. She pushed it through during one of those closed sessions. Called it an emergency safety measure. Next thing we knew, you were cut off. So why didn't anyone stop it?" Jim sighed. "Most people just go along with her. She's loud. She emails constantly. She threatens to fine people for bird feeders and plastic chairs. You either agree with her or get buried in paperwork." The tract. I leaned back and looked toward the lake. The fog had just burned off, revealing the spot where the dock used to be. "Empty now. Quiet." "People are mad," Jim said. "You took the one thing the neighborhood actually used." "I took my dock," I corrected. He held up his hands. "I'm not blaming you." "I don't think she expected you to fight back. Nobody ever does." We sat in silence for a moment. Red laid his head on Jim's boots, which made him smile a little. Then he asked, "Would you come to the meeting? Just explain what happened. Let people hear your side." I thought about it. The old me would have slammed the door on the idea. But something about the way Jim asked felt different. Not like a board member begging to save face, but like a neighbor who was finally fed up with being pushed around. So I said yes. An hour later, I walked into the clubhouse wearing the same boots I wore when I built that dock 15 years ago. Karen was at the front of the room, arms folded, eyes sharp like she'd already written the outcome in her head. The second she saw me, her nostrils flared. "Well," she said loudly, "look who finally decided to show up." I didn't respond. Jim stood up and cleared his throat. "Before we begin, the owner of the dock would like to speak." That word, *owner*, hit the room like a thunderclap. I walked to the front, unfolded the original lease agreement, and held it up. "This dock," I said, "was never donated. I built it. I paid for it. And this contract, signed by your founding board, states I can terminate the lease at any time." Which I did. Because you fenced me out of my own land. A murmur swept through the room. Karen stepped forward, trying to interrupt. "That land was subject to community review." "No," I cut in. "That land is outside the HOA boundary. Always has been. You lied. You pushed through illegal changes, and you did it because you thought I wouldn't fight back." I laid the document on the table and looked her in the eye. "I didn't come here to debate. I came to set the record straight." And judging by the looks on everyone's faces, confused, angry, some even embarrassed, I knew the cracks in her little empire had just started to show. Karen didn't say a word for a full 10 seconds. That was a record for her. The entire room was staring. Some leaned forward like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Others looked like they were finally seeing the truth. The smug, polished image she'd kept up for years was starting to peel. And I could tell she felt it. Then she snapped. "You have no right to humiliate this board," she hissed, grabbing the lease papers off the table like she was about to tear them in half. "This isn't some Wild West standoff. This is a community." I didn't flinch. Funny. Because I thought communities didn't steal from each other. That one hit. A few board members looked away. Jim coughed into his hand, probably to hide a grin. Karen clutched the papers and glared like she could burn holes through me. "You're just bitter because the lake has moved on. You think a dock makes you important? You're just one man clinging to the past." I took a step forward, calm as ever. "Lady," I said, "I'm not clinging to the past. I built the foundation this lake stands on. And if you think locking me out of my family's cabin was going to scare me, then you've clearly never met a man who knows how to use a wrench in the middle of the night." Gasps and a couple chuckles rippled through the crowd. That was it. The meeting unraveled after that. Karen tried to push through a vote to sanction me or issue fines. But every motion she made fell flat. The room wasn't on her side anymore. Not this time. People started asking questions. Not about me, but about her. "Why didn't you tell us he owned the dock? Did you really fence off his land without a vote? Wait, was this whole thing about the marina project?" Karen's smile turned plastic. Her voice tightened. She denied everything, said she was following protocol, that this was about safety, that I was just emotional. But every word sounded hollow now. She wasn't in control anymore. When the meeting ended, I didn't wait for applause. I just walked out, lease copy in my hand, Red at my side. But before I reached the door, a man I didn't recognize caught up with me. Early 50s, button-down shirt, looked more like a golf dad than a lake guy. "Hey," he said, "I've got a lot I could say, but I'll just ask one thing. What did you do with the dock?" I smiled. "Stored it. Safe and dry." He nodded slowly. "Good. We don't need her ruining anything else." The next day, I got calls from 4 other neighbors. 2 wanted to know how to opt their land out of the HOA. 1 asked if I could help them review their property lines. And the last just said, "Thanks for finally standing up to her." That's when I realized I wasn't the only one she tried to push around. I was just the first one to push back hard enough. Karen didn't stop, though. She doubled down. The following week, she sent out another newsletter. This one accused me of vandalism, claimed the dock removal was aggressive and unsafe, and called for an emergency special assessment to build a new one. The price tag? $94,000. When people saw that, they lost it. A dozen homeowners stormed the next board meeting. They demanded transparency, demanded an audit, demanded Karen resign. She tried to play victim, claimed she was protecting the integrity of the shoreline. But her words had no weight anymore. Too many people had watched her abuse power, ignore boundaries, and lie through her teeth. By the end of the night, a motion was passed. A vote scheduled. It wasn't official yet, but Karen's seat was slipping. And the lake? It was finally starting to breathe again. By the time the vote rolled around, the neighborhood didn't look the same anymore. The fancy HOA banners were still hanging, but no one looked at them. The community gardens sat half-weeded, the newsletter stopped arriving, and people had started talking to each other again, without fear of a citation for parking 2 inches over the curb. Karen, on the other hand, was acting like everything was perfectly fine. She went door to door with her usual tight-lipped smile, asking for support, claiming she was being targeted by someone with a personal vendetta. Some neighbors nodded politely. Others closed the door before she finished her sentence. Her grip was slipping and she knew it. But here's the thing, I wasn't even the one leading the charge anymore. Once people realized they could speak up without getting fined for a hose on the lawn or a flag hung on the porch, they started comparing stories. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been steamrolled. One guy, Greg, had been ordered to remove his backyard fire pit because it interfered with the natural airflow. A single mom down the road? She got fined for her daughter's chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Another man was told his American flag was too visually disruptive to the uniform look of the street. All of it, every warning, every penalty, was Karen. Signed, sealed, delivered. And now it was all catching up to her. Still, she clung to her seat. She kept writing long-winded emails about community values and personal accountability. She tried to paint herself as the only thing standing between the neighborhood and total chaos. But no one was buying it. That's when the board held the vote. A simple question on the ballot. Should Karen M. be removed from the HOA board of directors effective immediately? I didn't even have to campaign. People were ready. The meeting that night felt different. Packed room, standing only. No coffee or pastries like usual. Just tense silence and folded arms. Karen walked in late, like always, holding her head high. But her eyes darted fast. She saw the papers in people's hands, the highlighted emails, the printed photos of the dockless lakefront. And for the first time since this whole thing started, she looked nervous. The board opened the floor. Neighbors stood up one by one. Calm voices, straight facts. I was fined $200 for leaving my garage open for 15 minutes. I was threatened with a lien over an inflatable pool. She fenced off property that wasn't hers and lied about it. Not once did anyone raise their voice. They didn't have to. The stories did the work. Then, just before the vote, Karen stood and tried one last Hail Mary. I have served this neighborhood for 8 years, she said, her voice tight. I've given everything to this community. And I will not be railroaded by someone who tears down what we built just because they feel entitled to special treatment. She didn't say my name, but everyone knew who she meant. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. The vote was called. Paper ballots, counted in front of everyone. The final tally? 92% voted yes. Karen was out. She didn't say goodbye. Didn't shake hands. Just grabbed her binder, her phone, and walked out of the room like the floor had disappeared beneath her. After that night, things changed fast. The board scheduled a policy review. Fines were paused. Several members started looking into which parts of the lake actually fell under HOA control. Turns out, less than half of what Karen claimed was ever legally theirs. And the fence? Gone. 2 days after the vote, I heard the sound of metal being cut. Looked outside to see a few neighbors with bolt cutters, carefully removing each section and stacking it by the road. They didn't ask permission. They didn't need to. The lake path was open again. Red and I walked it that evening just like before. The trees rustled the same. The water was still. But the air felt different now. Lighter. Freer. And even though the dock was still stored away, the shoreline finally belonged to the people again. A week after the vote, Karen's house went up for sale. No big goodbye post. No apology letter. Just a quiet "for sale" sign planted crooked on her perfectly trimmed lawn. The same lawn she once fined a neighbor $50 for walking across with muddy boots. I drove past it one afternoon and saw her standing in the front window, arms crossed, phone to her ear, pacing. Probably yelling at some poor realtor about comps and lake views. Except now, her lake view was nothing but water and fog. No dock. No clubhouse events. No HOA power. Just the empty stretch where she used to rule. Funny thing is, people didn't really celebrate when she left. There wasn't a block party or champagne popping in the street. Nobody wanted revenge. They just wanted peace. They wanted their homes back. Their voices back. Their freedom back. And now, they finally had it. The board stayed quiet for a while. No rushed decisions. No new policies. They even opened the next meeting by asking for suggestions instead of issuing demands. People laughed, made jokes, even brought cookies. It felt like a neighborhood again, not a courtroom. One of the new board members, a younger guy named Ricky, reached out to me personally. Said they'd been reviewing past documents, found a bunch of fines and letters that never should have been sent. He apologized. Said they were offering refunds and officially closing out bogus citations. For some folks, that meant hundreds of dollars back. I told him I didn't need money, but I did want the community to start fixing what Karen broke. He nodded and asked if I'd be willing to help. So I did. We held a shoreline cleanup day. Neighbors brought rakes, gloves, garbage bags. Someone brought a grill. Kids ran through sprinklers. Music played from a Bluetooth speaker sitting on a folding chair. It was messy and real and perfect. One couple told me it was the first time in 5 years they didn't feel nervous just stepping outside. And maybe the best part? Nobody wore a name badge. Nobody handed out rules. The dock stayed where it was for now, hidden, safe, out of reach. I didn't bring it back, not yet, because I wanted people to understand something first. That dock was never the heart of the lake. They were. The families, the laughter, the old man who fishes every Sunday and never catches a thing but still swears they're just not biting today. The lake didn't need a structure. It needed space. So I kept helping. Quietly. Fixing broken benches. Repairing the old trail signs. Repainting the trail markers that Karen had ordered removed because they didn't match the aesthetic. People noticed. Some pitched in. Others just said thank you. And with every little step, the neighborhood started to rebuild itself, not with rules, but with trust. One morning, I walked the trail again with Red. Same path. Same breeze through the trees. But this time, no fence. No signs. Just open air and clear view. We reached the old spot where the HOA dock used to sit. Someone had placed a small wooden bench there. No plaque, no dedication. Just a note carved into the top with a pocket knife. Let the lake breathe. I ran my fingers over the words. Because that's what this whole fight was about. Not power. Not revenge. Just breathing room. Just the right to exist in peace on the land you love. Without someone standing over your shoulder with a clipboard and a fine slip. Back at the cabin, I sat on the porch with a fresh mug of coffee. The lake shimmered in the sun. Red stretched out beside me, groaned like an old man, and went to sleep. There were no emails. No meetings. No new demands. Just water. And quiet. The kind of quiet that feels earned. The kind that tells you you're home. It was early fall when Karen's house finally sold. The moving trucks rolled in just after sunrise, quiet and fast, like they were trying not to wake the neighborhood. A couple workers hauled boxes to the curb. No goodbyes. No neighbors gathering to wave her off. Just cardboard, furniture wrapped in plastic, and a cold silence. I stood by the fence line with my coffee, watching from a distance. Red sat beside me, his ears perked but calm. I thought maybe she'd walk out one last time, take a final glance at the lake she tried so hard to control. But she didn't. The front door slammed, the truck pulled away, And just like that, Karen was gone. Her mansion stood there like a leftover statue. Big, perfect windows. A long balcony that once overlooked the water and the dock. Only now, it overlooked an empty patch of shoreline and a bench carved with the words asterisk, "Let the lake breathe." Asterisk. The new owners were a young couple from out of state. Friendly enough. First thing they did? Take down the cameras Karen had installed on the side of the house. You could feel it right away. The air shifted. The whole neighborhood was lighter. A few days later, I got a visit from Greg, the guy who'd been fined for his backyard fire pit. He had a folder in his hand and a grin that looked like it had waited years to show up. "We're forming a new lakeside committee," he said. "No rules, no power trips. Just people who actually live here and want to protect what matters. No drama." He held out the folder. Inside was a proposal, a shared community dock. Built by volunteers. Managed by everyone. And here's the kicker, they didn't ask me to build it. They asked me to teach them. That's how I knew things had truly changed. So over the next few weekends, I walked folks through the basics, safe anchoring, decking, sealing. We didn't rush it. Took breaks, shared stories, laughed a lot. Someone brought homemade lemonade. Another guy grilled hot dogs on a little portable stand. It wasn't efficient, but it was ours. Piece by piece, the dock came together. This time, it wasn't about ownership. No leases, no control. Just a group of neighbors doing something together, the way it should have been all along. The morning we finished, the sun came up strong across the lake. The water glowed orange, calm as glass. We stood at the edge of the new dock. Not big, not flashy, but solid. And no one had to ask permission to use it. Afterward, I took a slow walk back toward my cabin. The trail was still soft with pine needles. The wind moved through the trees the way it always had. At the porch, I found a note taped to my screen door. "Thanks for not giving up. You reminded us what this place is supposed to feel like." No name. No signature. Just that. I tucked it into my coat pocket and sat down with Red at my feet. Out on the water, a canoe glided by, a teenager paddling while her dad gave instructions from the back. A couple kids tossed a ball on the shore. Someone had hung a tire swing from one of the old oaks again. The lake didn't just look better. It felt better. No more fences. No more fines. No more fear. Just neighbors. People. Families learning how to live beside each other instead of on top of each other. And as the breeze rolled off the water and the last trace of Karen's empire disappeared behind a sold sign, I knew. This wasn't just a victory. It was a reset. The dock was back. The land was free. And the lake finally belonged to everyone again. The first storm of the season rolled in not long after the dock was finished. Heavy clouds pushed across the sky like slow-moving freight trains. Thunder echoed off the hills, and the lake turned dark and choppy. Most people hunkered down inside, but I stayed out on the porch, watching the rain tear through the trees and ripple across the water like it had a score to settle. It reminded me of that day I first saw the fence, how it had felt like a storm in its own way. But now, with Karen gone, the HOA quiet, and the dock rebuilt by hands that cared, the storm didn't bother me. It felt like something being washed clean. The next morning, the lake was still again. And I wasn't the only one out early. I saw Ricky down by the new dock, inspecting the anchor points. Jim, who used to stay quiet at every HOA meeting, was helping him tighten a few bolts. Greg showed up with donuts and handed them out without a word. Nobody was in charge. Nobody needed to be. They worked like neighbors, not board members. And I'll admit, seeing them there made me proud, not of the dock itself, but of what it meant. That patch of wood floating on the lake was more than just a project. It was proof that when people stop trying to control everything and just start listening, they can build something better than rules ever could. Later that week, something unexpected happened. A letter came in the mail, stamped with the HOA seal. At first, I braced myself. Even with Karen gone, that logo brought a flash of annoyance. But this one was different. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly typed. Notice of restoration. All prior actions taken against your property have been formally reversed. You are welcome to enjoy full and uninterrupted access to your cabin, trail, and shoreline. No further review or compliance is required. Signed by every remaining board member. Even Jim. I couldn't help but chuckle. No legalese, no half-threats, just a long-overdue acknowledgement that they had gone too far. I pinned the letter to the wall of the cabin. Not out of pride, but as a reminder that sometimes the long way around is the only way to get home. A few days later, something even more surprising happened. I got a visit from a woman named Emily. Turns out she was Karen's niece. She'd inherited the house after Karen sold it in a rush and left the state. Emily was soft-spoken, nervous even. She held a small envelope and stood a few feet back from the porch, like she wasn't sure I'd even open the door. I just wanted to say something, she said, fidgeting with the envelope. My aunt talked about you all the time, but I don't think she ever really understood this place. I stayed quiet, let her speak. She was always trying to make everything perfect, but she didn't see how much damage that did. I don't agree with what she did, and I'm not planning to pick up where she left off. She handed me the envelope and stepped back. Inside was a note handwritten in careful cursive. You defended something worth protecting. Thank you. That was all it said. I nodded to her. You're welcome here. Just don't build any fences. She smiled. I'll bring cookies next time. And just like that, the house that once symbolized control and conflict had a new kind of energy. Emily hosted a cookout the following weekend. Invited everyone. No formalities, no flyers, just grilled corn, cold drinks, and folding chairs set up along the shore. The dock was full of laughter again. Kids jumped into the water. Teens hung string lights from the handrails. Someone played guitar. No one got fined. It wasn't perfect. Some boards still creaked, some bushes needed trimming. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that people showed up for each other. Not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. The lake had gone through a lot. But it endured. And now, so did the people.